What is up, and welcome back to Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. As always, I am your host, Brandon Silvers. Hope y'all are doing well. No time to waste today, so let's get into it. All right, the NBA playoffs have started, and it's such a relief because we were able to use March Madness and the start of baseball season to survive some of the more boring parts of the NBA season and come out on the other side. This is pretty typical for the NBA, honestly, but this season seemed like more of a drag than usual. So if we want to enjoy this year's NBA playoffs, we're going to have to move past these negative feelings, and what better way to do that than to just talk about them. So let's take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly from this NBA season. First up, let's talk about what was supposed to be the good this year, parity. We've had teams come seemingly out of nowhere to fight for playoff spots. The Utah Jazz were in the running to make the play-in tournament until the very end of the year, led by the odd couple of Lauri Markkanen and Jordan Clarkson. Then you've got the Oklahoma City Thunder. Danny Foxworth is one of the most positive people I know and the biggest Thunder fan that I know, but I don't think even he could have imagined 40 wins out of this squad to begin the year. They're so good that I know how to spell Shai Gilgeous-Alexander now, and I can almost tell the difference between both of their rookies named Jalen Williams. I'm still working on how to say their coach's name, though. Whatever. They're fun to watch, and unlike most of the other contenders in the West, they're young. But they're not even the most shocking come up in the league this year. That'd be the Sacramento Kings. The last time the Kings made the playoffs before this season, they did so in part by trading Peja Stojakovic to the Indiana Pacers for Ron Artest. At the time, Peja was still productive, but injuries had caused him to regress some from the 24 points per game star he had been, and at his peak, Peja was that dude. A 6'10" three-point sniper. Before that was just like what guys that size do. And Ron Artest was coming off his NBA record-long suspension for his role at the Malice at the Palace. He had come back to play a handful of games for the Pacers, but it was clear that that relationship was beyond repair, so they traded him to the Kings for Peja, and Ron helped the Kings make the playoffs, but they have not been back since. How long ago was that? So long ago that I just watched Peja's son play in the McDonald's All-American game as one of the top high school seniors in the country, and Ron Artest is no longer Ron Artest, but Meta Sandiford Artest. There's something exciting about seeing teams, particularly young teams, put it all together seemingly out of nowhere and become playoff contending teams. And in theory, not knowing who the top teams are should be exciting as well. To me, a genius, Milwaukee looks like the team to beat, but they've really flown under the radar for the most part. And while I wouldn't be shocked if they won, I also wouldn't be shocked if a lot of other teams won. This is parity. This should be exciting. Unfortunately, as I talked about with Brett during March Madness, parity isn't actually what people want, myself included. At least not the true definition of parity. When people say they want parity in the NBA, what we all hear is, I want more teams to have a chance to win the NBA championship. But what they're really saying is, I want my team to have a chance to win the NBA championship. Like I said, I'm guilty of it myself. Being a Lakers fan isn't fun now, but it hasn't always been like that. When the Lakers were dominating the NBA, winning ring after ring, I wasn't out here banging the old parity drum. And if your team is in that position, you aren't talking about parity either. Not only is that part of being a fan, but dynasties are what make the league entertaining. The NBA life cycle is dynasty based. We're either waiting for a dynasty to emerge, watching a dynasty be a dynasty, or rooting for someone to end the dynasty. We are currently in a run of 3 straight NBA finals where neither team appeared in the previous year's finals. That's something that, according to Wikipedia and my reading comprehension, hasn't happened since the 70s. What dynasties do is give every fan base, except for one, a common enemy to hate. This is important because it unifies us, and hate is stronger than love. Now, many of us are on the same hating page on certain things like Rudy Gobert and the Memphis Grizzlies, but we hate them just because they're easy to hate. With dynasties, we hate them because they're robbing us of what we want, that fake parity, our own team's chances to win. That's a lot different than hating Rudy Gobert for being French and starting COVID, or hating the Grizzlies because Dylan Brooks dresses like a pimp named Slickback in a live-action Boondocks movies on Tubi. See, they're villains, and villains are good but dynasties are better. Without a dynasty to hate, or an emerging dynasty to give us that will they or won't they feeling, or a dynasty on the way down trying to make their last stand, it's hard to get emotionally invested, particularly in the regular season, which feels longer each year. I have to pick and choose how much of the NBA I follow day to day just to make sure I can make it through the playoffs. Speaking of that, it's time to talk about the bad now, and you can't talk about the bad in the NBA without talking about load management. The new collective bargaining agreement is going to try to reduce load management by requiring players to play 65 games to be eligible for postseason awards. So I'm interested to see how that works because, oh buddy, load management stinks. I understand that players are more powerful and athletic, and they've been playing more since we make kids specialize earlier and earlier, so their bodies need rest, and we shouldn't force them to play through minor injuries that guys used to play through all the time. Logically, I understand that. But the problem with load management is you don't see the injuries it prevents. I can't hop into the metaverse and see, oh, taking this game off helped AD avoid this season-ending injury. In fact, a lot of the time, the opposite feels true. The biggest load management guys, the Zions, the Kawhis, they just keep getting hurt. There's this guy on Twitter, Jeff Stotts, aka @InStreetClothes, who tracks this kind of thing, and he found that during the 2022-2023 season, players missed a combined 5,682 games due to injury and illness, which is the most ever outside of the COVID-impacted years. How many times can you expect someone to make plans to watch a game on TV, like I used to do, only to put the game on and the players that they wanted to see are out resting, or, God forbid, paying money for an actual ticket only to get to the arena and see the player that they wanted to see are sitting there in street clothes? I don't go to a lot of NBA games because I'd have to travel to do so, but even if I didn't, I doubt I'd pay that kind of money just to be stressed out about the product that I was actually going to get to see. That's not even considering that even if everybody does play, security might escort you out because Russell Westbrook gets his feelings hurt when you call him Westbrick. And we've reached the point where load management doesn't even follow the logic that was being sold to us. I was under the impression that teams used it to keep players fresh for the playoff push and beyond. So imagine my surprise when the Lakers sat AD during a game against the Rockets in the middle of fighting to make the playoffs or the play-in tournament. You are resting this man during the exact time I was led to believe all the previous resting was for. Surprise, surprise, they lost that game, which is inexcusable even without AD. And what's silly is that winning it could have helped them make the playoffs outright and got the whole team an extra week of rest. Instead, we had to watch whatever that game was against the Timberwolves. Are we going to have guys missing games mid-playoff series to save themselves for a Game 7? Is that next? Get up 3-0 and just sit your stars a game or two so that they're well rested to end the series? Like, what are we doing? Now, maybe it was anti-labor propaganda, but all I've ever heard was how Michael Jordan wanted to play so much that he had a for the love of the game clause written into his contracts so he could play as much as possible and not get in trouble with his team. Or how Kobe wanted to play no matter what because he didn't know if it was going to be the only opportunity for people to see him. And how AC Green didn't even have sex his entire career so he would be fresh enough to play in every single game. So when I see Joel Embiid sitting out a matchup against Jokic at the end of the season where he could cement his status as the MVP this year and prove once and for all that JJ Redick isn't as smart as Kendrick Perkins, I'm sitting here wondering, what the hell is going on? Where did we go wrong? And I know a lot of players are upset about the 65-game minimum because a lot of their contracts have incentives that pay them bonuses for postseason awards. But so what? It's hard for me, a broke person, to get upset on behalf of you, a 100-millionaire, about doing a job that pays you that kind of money. So no, I won't get upset when Mikal Bridges is named league MVP because he's the only player eligible. And I don't care that had the rule been in place at the time, Patrick Ewing wouldn't have won Rookie of the Year. Take it from him like he took away my childhood by not signing that autograph. Fun fact, if we did that and gave it to the guy who came in second, Xavier McDaniel would have been Rookie of the Year, and he's from Columbia, South Carolina, so I'm even more in favor of doing it now. The saying goes that the best ability is availability. If Kevin Durant's impact on his team is a 10 every single game he plays, but he only plays 47 games, then he is less valuable than a 6 who plays every game. That's math. That's advanced analytics. Since we're on bad, let's talk about advanced analytics. I covered the biases at play in the MVP conversation last week, so check that episode out if you haven't already. But that's not the only thing that has ruined that debate and tried to ruin sports as a whole. The biases are under the surface, but the bulk of the talk surrounding the MVP conversation has been advanced analytics. Specifically, that advanced analytics said that Jokic was the best player in the league this year. And that's great. He's great. Maybe we can give him a best math award. But the MVP award is, and always has been, a narrative award. People pretending that it isn't because they're good at math and they're using that are just really good at ignoring that the narrative this year is advanced analytics. And by narrative award, I mean it takes into account on the court play and combines that with the story of what they're accomplishing on the court. If it was simply who's the best player or most valuable to their team, do you know how many MVPs LeBron, Shaq, Kobe, and Michael Jordan would have actually won? Sports are more than numbers. They're entertainment, stories, feelings. To strip them down to an Excel formula, a TI-84 calculator, an abacus, whatever, takes away the essence of why people fall in love with sports in the first place. Nobody picks up a basketball because they love the feeling of calculating win shares per 48. I mean, look at this formula. If this is all sports are, then why play the games at all? Let's just do some calculations and call it a day. Nobody even has to get out there. Let's do the advanced analytics and load management all at once. But there's more to sports. There's more to basketball. You can put a number on Kobe's shooting percentages in clutch situations, but how do you quantify how confident he was taking late game shots compared to Sasha Vujacic? And then how that level of confidence affected their respective shooting percentages? Or the amount of fear defenders had when guarding Kobe in those situations versus guarding Shannon Brown, and how that affected the defenders' play. Stats and numbers are great, but there's more to what's going on than just that. A lot of these metrics are useful, but they don't tell the full story, so we shouldn't wave them around acting like they do. They are a guide, not the end-all be-all. They're simply numbers, and numbers can be used without providing context. Trust me, I'm undefeated in the NBA Finals. I mean, you don't need numbers to tell you that the NBA has an officiating problem, do you? No, just your eyeballs. Matter of fact, that's going to be my ugly from this season. Now, bad officiating is nothing new. I say that as the Rasheed Wallace of St. Andrews Parks and Playground. People have always complained about refs, but it does feel like they're worse than ever. I believe there are a couple of factors at play. First, the game is a lot faster, so it's harder to officiate. Also, we have more access to the awful calls. They go up on social media and they're seen everywhere in a matter of minutes after they happen. This helps us become super familiar with the habitual offenders like Josh Tiven, who hands out texts if you don't pass him the ball kindly enough. Whereas earlier generations, they didn't have all that publicity around their bad calls, so they could just suck and no one would know who they were. And then there's the lack of transparency around what's being done to address officiating issues. The NBA will send out a press release telling us they're fining Fred VanVleet $30,000 for his comments about referee Ben Taylor, but what's being done about Taylor making terrible calls? They don't even make the refs face the media after games. Instead, the head official talks to one reporter after the game, and they make these PR firm type statements, and then they release that to the press. And all that lack of transparency does is lead to ridiculous conspiracy theories when really the most likely cause of bad officiating is just that some of these people are bad at their jobs. I mean, officiating is a job like any other at the end of the day, and just think about how many people you know who are bad at their jobs. Almost as bad as the bad officiating is the players who complain about it. Now, not all of them. If Fred VanVleet complains, then I'm going to listen. He doesn't say a whole lot. But we need to get a grip on who we allow to complain about this. So I'll start by telling you who we won't allow to complain. First, my arch nemesis, Trae Young. Trae made some comments shortly after Fred did, actually referencing Fred's comments, but no thank you. This is the foul baitingest dude in the history of the world. He should be sending refs Christmas cards every year for allowing him to score so many points off free throws. He's actually someone who has made the game harder to officiate because not only do refs have to figure out what is and isn't a foul, but they have guys like Trae pretending to be fouled every trip up the court. I have this theory that I'm sharing for the first time today that Trae has not cut his hair because it adds dramatic flair to his flopping that helps him get more calls. It's time to hit the barber and quit the bullshit, and most importantly, you can't complain about refs. Also, Luka Doncic. Luka is always near the top of the league in technical fouls, and for good reason. Every missed shot, in Luka's mind, he was fouled. But I don't actually think he believes that deep down. I think something else is at play. If you have ever played pickup basketball with anybody over the age of like 32, you will notice that at the end of games, they tend to start arguing more and more about the score, the calls, whatever they can find. Games end up taking forever to finish while they argue about whatever thing, no matter if anybody disputes them or not. And they're not really arguing because they disagree with anything. This is strategic arguing. This is arguing to stall, arguing to catch their breath, arguing to make sure that they don't catch a cramp. They just worked a shift at an Amazon warehouse. They're not in basketball shape, so they argue to make up the difference. Luka also has the conditioning of someone who just worked a shift at an Amazon warehouse, so he has to argue to catch his breath as well. That's why you see him on the other end of the court yelling at the ref while his team is defending 4-on-5. Well, enough is enough, big fella. Get yourself an Orange Theory membership and give the refs a break. They make plenty of bad calls. You don't need to make up ones on plays that lead to transition opportunities for the other team so that you don't have to run back on defense. And finally, the worst offender of them all, Draymond Green. He complains so much that refs are actually tired of calling technical fouls on him. If he were ref correctly, he would get ejected in the first quarter of most games. Instead, he gets one tech and takes everything to another level, and Steve Kerr has to pretend that an out-of-control Draymond is actually good for the Warriors. He's the only person on this earth that will make me feel sympathy for referees. The messenger matters. Draymond is like Joe Rogan complaining about cancel culture. Bro, you are untouchable. Get a grip. Whew, all right. I feel better already. All the NBA needs to do to fix the regular season is guarantee my favorite team wins, make my favorite players play every single game, assure me there will be no math, make the officiating perfect, and get rid of the players I don't like. What can I say? Only practical solutions here. All right, so what's the good? Well, none of the bad and ugly will matter if the playoffs are entertaining. We'll forget about all that until next regular season. And honestly, we're in a pretty good spot. I was someone who was incredibly skeptical about the play-in tournament as a concept, and while it's not the actual playoffs, it has been very entertaining each year it's taken place. Without it, we would never have known that DeMar DeRozan's daughter's shriek could lead to an opponent missing half their free throws and blowing a 19-point lead. Russell Westbrook would have had her escorted out with a swiftness. And despite being weaker this year, the Western Conference has some interesting first-round matchups, including the Shannon Sharp Sweatergate matchup of my Los Angeles Lakers versus the Memphis Grizzlies. The Lakers are set up perfectly to pull off the upset and get rid of Memphis, so I know that's not going to happen, but maybe we'll get some fireworks. Not from Ja Morant, because he spent a weekend at a breathing retreat and did a very sincere interview with Jalen Rose, so he's quite obviously a changed man. But Dillon Brooks is still Dillon Brooks, and if I'm the Lakers, I'm sitting Shannon Sharp courtside every game like he's DeMar's daughter, and I'm just going to see what happens. This has nothing to do with anything, but I do have to mention that Grizzlies backup point guard Tyus Jones looks like if British R&B singer Craig David was a werewolf. And if my Lakers do what I expect them to do, then the second round could give us a Warriors-Grizzlies matchup, and those two teams hate each other. Everyone up in arms about Angel Reese's taunts must have missed what the Warriors were doing to Dillon Brooks during their Christmas Day game. Over in the East, I mentioned how the lack of a dynasty was hurting the league, but they've got the Bucks, who might have repeated last year if Chris Middleton was healthy, and he's back, and Giannis is still Giannis. I said earlier how they'd flown under the radar, and I'm not really sure how, but at one point they won 16 in a row after Middleton came back, and they didn't lose back-to-back games after his return until they rested everyone for the playoffs the last 2 games of the season. Winning it all twice in 3 years might mean that we're finally looking at the dynasty the league has been so desperate for. We'll need Giannis to be a little bit more hateable though, so he's going to have to throw a couple more ladders and find a worse brother than Thanasis to put at the end of the bench. But overall, the playoffs could erase all the bad feelings we've had toward the league this season, at least temporarily, and I'm excited for them. So I'm going to try to enjoy them. This has been another episode of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. Thank you for liking, subscribing, rate, reviewing, and sharing, and I will catch you next week.